everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we're gonna do my year in review for 2016. In 2016, I read 143 books with an average year-round star rating of 3.9. That's really pretty good. At the start of 2016, I made a video where I talked about my main reading goals that I had for the year. The first one being that I wouldn't set a challenge on Goodreads. I did put a number on Goodreads really to make it stop annoying me and telling me to start a challenge, but I didn't care whether or not I beat it. So I purposefully set it really low. I set it for 100 books, and obviously that's something I can achieve with relative ease. The second thing was that I wanted to try to read books where I really wanted to read them. That I wasn't just reading them to chase after a goal, and I wasn't just reading them for some other arbitrary reason, but that I was reading books where, at the time when I was reading them, I really wanted to read them. And the reason I wanted to do that is because it put a little less pressure on me, so that if I wasn't liking it or I didn't want to finish, I could sort of put it aside. I wouldn't feel the need to finish. That's not to say that I didn't finish some books I wasn't enjoying, because we all know if I want to review a book, I at least finish it. So let's go into my favorite books of this year. The only order that these books are in is the order in which they were read throughout the year. So we're going from beginning of the year through the end of the year. Maybe Someday by Colleen Hoover. This was the first Colleen Hoover book I ever read, and I really quite enjoyed it. In fact, all of the other ones I've read haven't quite stood up to this one, in my opinion, for the fluffy feels that it gives me. Considering I don't normally read new adult and I don't normally read romance books, this is something that's not usually in my comfort zone, and I ended up quite enjoying it. Was it perfect? No, but what little problems it had, and there were some things which I admittedly found mildly problematic, I went, everything else is good enough that I'm willing to be like, alright, yes, I love this book. I really love this book and I'm invested in it. The Name of the Rose by Umberto Eco. This book is just phenomenal. I read this book and then in conjunction also watched the film adaptation starring Sean Connery. This book is so fantastic. It's long, it's definitely not fast, but it's so worth the read. It's a mystery thriller set in a Benedictine monastery during the Spanish Inquisition, and it's just so good. Dictator by Robert Harris. This is the third and final book in his Cicero trilogy, one that I was really anticipating and was so happy to read. It follows the last bit of Cicero's life, and he came to a rather tragic end if you know anything about Roman history. So reading this bit, which is really the death of the Senate, the death of the Roman Republic and the rise of the Empire, was really emotional. I was very choked up by the end. Morning Star, Pierce Brown. Pretty much the best book I read this year. Not even pretty much. It is the best book I read this year by a long shot. I would re-listen to and reread this book and really this entire series all the time, making me even more hyped for the fact that we've got Iron Gold coming out next year, which just be still my heart. When I found out that Pierce Brown was not only writing more, but writing more books in this universe, I was so excited I could barely contain myself. This book concludes his Red Rising trilogy in dramatic fashion, and really, I think, did a phenomenal job of closing out that story in a way that to me was both satisfying and realistic. The Winner's Kiss by Marie Witowski. This was the final book in the Winner's trilogy. This entire series was really fantastic. I called it like a YA political fantasy trilogy because I had no other way to really describe it. Much of the battles are fought with words and with scheming and cunning more than oftentimes with battles. And the third book brought in some really interesting things that had only been touched upon in the first two books related to the kind of religion and the spirituality of one of the characters. And the third book really brought that more to the forefront and decided to expand upon it, which is something I'd been looking for and was really pleased it happened. It came to a wonderful conclusion where I went, yes, that is always how this should have ended. The final confrontation between the protagonist and the antagonist, I went, that is always how it should have ended. I love it. The Black Count by Tom Rice. This was a non-fiction book which I read this year, which tells the story of the father of Alexandre Dumas and his grandfather, which were both the inspiration for the Count of Monte Cristo, which is one of my favorite classics of all time, probably Dumas' magnum opus, and arguably the best revenge story ever written. It was a really interesting bit of history, and I liked learning about it. It's just kind of an era of history that I like to learn about, which is Napoleonic France, and it was just written so well in a way that was almost like reading a piece of fiction. A Court of Mist and Fury. This book was infinitely superior to its predecessor. The slightly problematic issues of the relationships were kind of changed and resolved. There are some things that Sarah J. Maas does, which she does in Throne of Glass, which bother me, which is just, it's essentially character assassination so that her protagonist can move on to new love interests. Like, God forbid she just fall out of love with one and in love with another. It's like you literally need to destroy the character of the previous love interest so that you can go, ugh, I hate him. It works a little better here. It's still mildly problematic, but it does work better here. As a result, and because there were many parts of this book that I really quite enjoyed, again, there are still problems. I can point to plenty of problems in this book, but I still really enjoyed it, and in fact, I'm enjoying this series more than I'm enjoying the Throne of Glass series at the moment, so this one lands the list and Empire Storms does not. Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. This is the first novel in an upcoming series of his, and I remember I read the arc to this novel. I read the first freaking, paragraph, and I texted my friend and I said, if the rest of this book is like this paragraph, I'm in love with it already. It is irreverent, it is crass, it is brutal, it is absurdly violent, and oh my god, it is so not safe for work in any regards, and I love every page of it. I love everything about it. There are so many good things that happen in this book, and I am so ready for the next one, and it is also one of the few books that, quite frankly, other than the Bartimaeus trilogy by Jonathan Stroud, have properly, in my opinion, used footnotes to provide snarkentary on the plot, as well as additional information, but mainly snarkentary, and it just brings me joy. I loved this book, and I'm so ready for the next books in this series. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. This book I actually read twice this year. I read it back in June and then forgot I read about it and then watched the BBC miniseries that was done thanks to Netflix and then went and reread the book. And I do like the miniseries more than the book. I'll flat out say it. And that's not to say the book is lesser, because the book is fantastic. This is a monumental achievement in terms of writing, and it is a tome. My paperback copy clocks in over 1,000 pages. It's huge, and it is fantastic. I just got more enjoyment out of the TV series, but I did still enjoy the book, and I think I got more out of the book after watching the miniseries and then going back to the book and reading it again with almost sort of fresh eyes and going, oh wow, yeah, okay, this is good, this is really good. Again, still like miniseries more. Kill the Father by Sandrone Razzieri. This is another arc that I read. This is a thriller that was translated out of Italian, and it's one of the few thrillers I've ever really just sunk my teeth into, where I read it cover to cover nonstop. This book was so much fun. I am so ready for the next ones. It's one of the few books where characters have PTSD in some way, shape, or form that usually manifests as something else as well. And it actually legitimately causes them problems through the plot. Like, one character, he's now highly claustrophobic. He can't be in really tight spaces, and it causes him a lot of issues throughout the story. The other one has intense amounts of anxiety and will have panic attacks. They cause her problems throughout the story. And I say this because oftentimes I see PTSD used in novels, and it's sort of just used as a oh yes, this character's PTSD, and it'll bother them briefly in the beginning, and then it just magically vanishes, and that's it. These characters, they are still fighting. It is something they have to deal with every single day and every single moment, because something could set off their PTSD. I'm really excited to know this series, but distressed to know that I'm gonna have to wait even longer for the other books. Not only because I read this in arc, but because they'll be written in Italian and then they'll have to be translated. But God, I freaking loved this thriller. The amazing book is Not on Fire, and Dan and Phil Go Outside. I grouped these two together because they're both by Dan Howell and Phil Lester, and they kind of go hand in hand in a way. These are really just kind of the delightful brainchildren of these two YouTubers. These are just delights. They brought smiles to my face, and it made me feel really happy while I read them or listened to them in the case of Chavanoff. And I'm just glad they're in the world. Gemini by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman. This is the second book in the Illuminae Files series. Illuminae was one of my favorite books of last year. I loved this book. I don't think I loved it quite as much as Illuminae, only because I was a little more invested in the romance of Illuminae. But Gemini was still fantastic, and it had everything that I loved about Illuminae in there, including any characters who were left alive at the end of Illuminae popped back up, and I was like, yes, they're here, my babies. And I'm really looking forward to the third book in this series. I'm so excited for whatever they will bring, which I'm sure will involve tearing my heart out and just like plopping it down there and stomping on it until there's nothing left. And finally, Augustus by John Williams. This is one of the last books that I read this year, and it was so fantastic. It is a fictionalized kind of biography or telling of the story of the life of Augustus Caesar, originally called Octavian, who was the first emperor of Rome. And I said in my month in review where I mentioned this book that while this book is definitely like very pro Augustus, like Augustus can really do no wrong, the writing is so beautiful, so beautiful, that it kind of took my breath away by the end of it. And I really had fallen in love with this book, that I kind of pushed that aside and said, this book really is spectacular. And now we move to the dregs, the books that I hated this year. Thankfully, not that long of a list. And while I certainly didn't love everything that I read, there were only a few which really stood out in my memory as getting that star of pissing me off somehow. The Black Cauldron. I mean, I should have known better. I knew I wasn't gonna like this book because I didn't like the first book, and then someone said, oh, but the second novel gets so much better. Yeah, no, it didn't. In fact, I think it got worse. I clearly am just not the audience for the Chronicles of Prydain, and yeah, no. The Immortals. I have an entire video review of why I hate this book, and I did a Goodreads review of why I hated this book. And the sad part about this is that up until about the 50% mark, this might have gotten a 3.5, 4-star rating from me. And then it like jumped off a cliff and committed book suicide, in my opinion, and I really hated it by the end. Hated it so much, oh my god. The Dark Days Club. Another one for which I have a video where I basically ranted and raved about how much I didn't like this book because, I gave some solid reasons as to why I didn't like this book. But to recap, the main character is terrible and the pacing is, oh my god, there is no pace. So slow that it's unbearable. But really the main character. The special fucking snowflake that she is. Rebel of the Sands. Yeah, I did not make a video review for this one, but I did write a Goodreads review, and I listed all of my various problems with this book. One of them being that I do not think the world was well done, that I hate the time skip that's in the middle of it for no freaking reason, that the love/romance is gag-worthy, and that the Western influence essentially vanishes within about 4 chapters. And I was listening. By the end of this book, I couldn't have cared less about the characters. Like, it was the big climax finale, and I'm sitting there going, I really don't care. They could all die right now. Seriously, just kill them all. Warrior Witch. This I read as an arc. It was the 3rd and final novel in the Malediction trilogy. Now, I read the first book back in 2015. I'd picked it up on a whim, and I thought that the stuff that was done with trolls was quite interesting. It was a paranormal romance, like, it was certainly not something I would normally read, and even reading it, I was like, I don't love it, but there are some interesting things going on here. The second book had serious pacing problems. It was way too slow. Just way too slow. And the third novel tried to make up for that by, like, hitting the ground and running. But then it just kind of stayed there and didn't do anything, and then the ending. Right. Okay. The ending is so bad. I have so many problems with the ending, and it's not a like, oh, my girl didn't end up with the guy I wanted her to. It's like, no, it's just legitimately a bad ending. There was no point to end, like, no reason to end this novel the way it was ended. Like, what was the point? I fail to see the point. That was really the part that for me sealed the deal of, oh my god, I hate this book. A Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir. Again, should have known this was going to induce rage in me, and this takes the cake as the worst book I read this year, and I skim-read it. Like, I skim-read this book, and it still managed to make me so furious I was probably foaming at the mouth. I wrote a Goodreads review, and I did not hold back. The funny thing is even when I'm writing highly critical, highly negative reviews, I still try to be kind of polite for, like, the bulk of it. I'll be very annoyed and my snark will clearly come through, but I try not to swear. I try not to like really get too caught up and pissed off. This one, I told this book to go fuck itself. That is how much I hated this book. That is how angry this book made me. If you really want to know all my thoughts, you can go see the Goodreads review because, yeah, it's a small work of art in terms of my rage and just clearly tells you why I hate this book. I should have known better. And finally, The Bone Witch. This was one which is on this list only because I was so excited to read it, and it was so boring. Oh my god, it was so boring. Like, nothing happened. And by the time shit happened, I didn't care. I was like, nope. There is zero fucks given right now. I don't care. I don't care at all. On the whole, 2016 was a pretty good reading year. I read stuff that I liked. I read more stuff that I liked than that I didn't like. And I didn't feel pressured to constantly like read tons, which was really exciting and I think less stressful for me. There are definitely books that I want to read in 2017 and we'll see what my goals are for that year. But that's it for me today, you guys. So until next time, cheers.